All right, this is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I am your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle, joined with my co-host Brian Solomon. How's it going?
Very well, Al. Happy to be here as always.
Yes, and joining us this week back on the show, Jason McVeigh, PWI writer. How's it going?
Very good, Al. Thank you for having me.
I think we call you our UK correspondent. Is that officially the title?
I don't know if that's the official title, but yeah, that's among other things. That's myself.
Yes, and on coming off St. Patrick's Day, a little authenticity with Jason here. Lot to talk about this week. It's been a few weeks, a little longer gap than usual in between shows, some scheduling issues. Because of that, as usual, got a whole pile up of news. We're in WrestleMania season, so definitely going to be catching up on all things WrestleMania, but also a whole lot of news on the AEW side. I wore my Sting shirt to celebrate the retirement of Sting. We'll talk a little bit about Revolution, Sting's send-off, and the many other comings and goings on AEW. Like I said, like a really newsworthy few weeks between Sting leaving, Okada arriving, Mercedes arriving, Will Ospreay's first match as a AEW contracted talent. A lot going on. So we'll talk about it all. Maybe also get into WWE Hall of Fame if there's some time. Who are the names on the list this year. And then later on, going to hear from an old friend of the show, another guy from the PWI family, Colin Hunter, proprietor of Kayfabe News, one of my absolute favorite wrestling websites, or really any websites. I know, Brian, you had him on your show not too long ago, right?
Yes, a couple of weeks ago he was on.
Yeah. Super fun guy to talk to. Obviously really funny. He's got a movie he is working on, a documentary about referees of all things, and has become a referee the last several months for this documentary. Him and his filmmaking partner, I hope I'm saying her name right, Sarah Geidlinger, I believe, yes. Joined me recently to chat. We're going to get a portion of the interview here on the podcast. We're going to have it all up on YouTube. So check it out. We talk about kayfabe news, kind of, been some really serious news between all the Vince stuff, and Colin talks a little bit about navigating some sensitive stuff in kind of the comedy world. And then obviously a lot of discussion, some talk about his years with PWI and what he did here, and a lot of discussion about the movie, putting it together, and the really interesting life of a referee, sometimes a role in wrestling that is not appreciated enough. And certainly he got appreciation from it for doing it. So stay tuned. Real quick, let me tell you about the latest issue of, and we got scolded the last time for not covering up my address, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the May issue. It is our third annual spotlight on Japan, and we've got loads of coverage of Japan here, All Japan, New Japan. We've got features on Julia, on Okada, on so much more. So again, 30 in a row. This is another one of the innovations that Kevin's brought on, a special Japan based issue. That's not all that's in here. One really cool thing, an interview with Sting. So I was hoping to have the writer Colette on. We weren't able to figure it out, but maybe we'll be able to in the future. So a look back, Sting talking about not just his career, but sort of his career in the wrestling magazines, looking back at some famous stories and covers that he's been a part of, and a lot more. We have got some coverage on the Vince scandal that I think was breaking right around press time. So, but we got it into the magazine. TNA Hard to Kill, you did that, right, Jason? Writing about Hard to Kill. Tell us a bit about what's in here.
Yeah, I was just looking at Hard to Kill and kind of figuring it's a PWI classic, the real winners and losers of Hard to Kill, so as opposed to the actual match winners. So it's always a fun one to do, something like that. Yeah,
that's really cool. That's something we used to do for WrestleMania, mixing it up, doing it for Hard to Kill. A show I really enjoyed. I mean, I know it's been a few weeks or even a couple months since then, but I really liked TNA Hard to Kill, and much, much more. Anyway, head on over PWI-online.com. Get the issue, whether it's just the one issue you want, or you can subscribe. Certainly get a lot off of the cover price. We now have these combo packages where you could have both the print edition and the digital edition. And it's the way to go. Digital comes a lot faster than the print edition. This way you will have both. Again, PWI-online.com. Neat little 45 brand here now. 45 years in the magazine, which just kind of blows my mind. Very proud to have been a part of that. All right, lots of news to talk about, guys. Let's jump into it. Let's start with AEW and something I want to talk about for weeks now. Goodbye, Sting. I grabbed a lot of my Sting merch. There's no shortage of it. So I'll begin here and then go over to you, Brian. For me, one of the best wrestling send-offs I've ever seen. I mean, I think I don't have to say much more than that. I mean, I think it'd have to go back to Ric Flair in WrestleMania 24, the Shawn Michaels match. And there have been others, but I just thought pitch perfect. I really thoroughly loved it. A beautiful tribute to Sting. That much more impressive given that they were kind of hamstrung by not having access to most of Sting's career. My sense is that we lent a hand there a lot, and I'd be interested in talking to Kevin about that because certainly a lot of Pro Wrestling Illustrated images in the really classy package they did ahead of time with him in the theater. Loved that. Loved his kids being out there dressed in the Sting gear. Not a surprise. You know, this was not 60-something-year-old Sting phoning it in. And that's always been, Sting's been on so long now, and he never gives, if anything, the criticism should be the other way, that he does too much, especially for a guy this age. But, this wasn't hiding him in a tag team match where Darby was doing most of the work. Sting super active. Wins, retains a title, maybe a little bit kind of outside of tradition of wrestling, especially when you're holding a title, going out with the title rather than doing the honors. I thought the Bucks did a really nice job, and in a lot of ways, that the right guys to be in that spot. I just loved it top to bottom. What did you think, Brian?
Yeah, it's rare in wrestling that you get that kind of closure, just because just the nature of wrestling. It's just very hard to book something like that. And I agree with you. I think it was a great swan song for him. It's insane watching him do some of these things. It has been the whole time he's been in AEW. It's kind of like jaw-dropping. But I thought this was a great way to send him off. Immediately when I saw the package, I thought of Kevin and I thought of PWI. Immediately as I started seeing the photos, I'm going, okay, looks like PWI came to the rescue here. And I even tweeted about it. I could have done without Darby going through that plate of tempered glass.
I was going to say the same thing. Yeah, that's my one criticism.
Horrifying, but that's not a knock against Sting. I thought it was great for him. Great.
Yeah, I had the same criticism. I didn't love the glass spot. I mean, I'm glad it turned out okay. I mean, I'd be lying if I didn't say it was like an incredible spectacle to see it and all that. But
but the first thing I thought of was like, oh, okay, so they still haven't let go of that CM Punk thing, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
maybe Punk was sort of proven right there in that, like, that was not pretty. I mean, you saw him just open up everywhere. I mean,
that wasn't even like real true. I mean, it wasn't sugar glass, but it was not real true pane glass. It was tempered glass. It's like the stuff they make like shower doors out of and things like that. And even that is something you probably shouldn't be putting your body through like that.
And beyond that, it's just even the dangerous side, that first spot with Sting and the bat, and it doesn't break and he's got to swing it again. It's just like, this is more complicated than it needs to be. And yes, it made for an incredible visual when Darby went through it. But risk reward. I don't know that the match would have been that much worse, or maybe it could have even been better without it. But either way, I mean, it's sort of nitpicky. Jason, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I thought it was tremendous. I think the biggest compliment I can give it is I watched it with my wife, who is not a wrestling fan. And aside from the glass spot, which horrified her, she understood the emotion of everything else that was going on and thought it was excellent. So I think the testament to them for doing it. Whenever it was announced that this was going to be his retirement match, part of me kind of hoped, will he go back to WWE and they'll give him like a proper real send-off for them? After that, I hope he doesn't. I think that was done so perfectly from the opening, as you talked about, in the empty theater, which I texted Kevin and said, did you supply pictures for this? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. So it was so well done. And the match itself, and as you said, credit to the Bucks as well, for doing their part. I thought they would have won, but it was a lovely send off for Sting, certainly.
the other thing that just made it so great was obviously the setting, there in Greensboro, where he had the match that sort of made his career with Flair. Am I right? It was Greensboro? Is that where they were?
Yes.
Yes. And the crowd, I mean, they were just eating this up, and that was really the great thing. I mean, really from the beginning, from that video in the theater, right to the end, they were so into it after a fairly long show where a lot happened, and I think they really gave Sting the treatment he deserves. I wanted to talk a little bit about Sting because he's such an interesting guy that, on one hand, clearly like a legend, but also over those, almost 40 years of his career, a lot of that time, some folks have felt he sort of underachieved in a way, in that a lot of times where he was that top guy, he was just below another act. So in mid 90s WCW, which is where I think people remember most from, he took something of a backseat to the NWO and Hulk Hogan and a lot of these other big names that were there. And that seemed to have happened a lot, even into AEW these last few years, where before he announced his retirement, he became kind of, I don't want to say another guy on the roster, but he was not like that featured guy. So in some ways, treated like a legend, other ways, maybe not as prominent as you would think for a guy over this career. I mean, the one time that he really was the guy that I remember was in those early 90s WCW period when business was really down. Even that's sort of my favorite, Sting. I love Surfer Sting, early 90s Surfer Sting was my favorite. But now that we can kind of look at it in the rear view mirror, Brian, I mean, what do you see as Sting's legacy? Is he an all-time great?
Yes, I think so. I mean, the thing that people always said about him, traditionally, even though it changed later, was that he was always the biggest star, the biggest name guy who had never been to WWE, right? That was always the thing about him. Now, of course, he eventually did. But I mean, I think we could all agree that by that point, I mean, that was beyond the most memorable accomplishments of his career and what he's really known for. So the things that he really made his name with and established his legend with are outside of WWE mostly. I mean, he had the WrestleMania match, which is, of course, a big deal. He had the Seth Rollins match where, that, thank goodness that wasn't the end of his career. I mean, what a shame that would have been. But I mean, he's really remembered for what he did outside the company. And I mean, I have to say, I know he was in TNA and he had the AEW stuff, but it's always going to be the WCW era. And it's interesting to me because even though the Crow Sting is the version that I have to say is probably best remembered today by fans and most identified with him, especially by younger fans, agreeing with you, Al, the best work of his career, if you're looking at it that way, is when he was doing the Surfer thing. I mean, really, from the tail end of the 80s through into the early middle 90s, I mean, where he really was at various points the man in WCW, or at least very, very close to it. I will always be partial to the matches he had with Vader. I mean, that is one of the all-time classic feuds for me. Obviously, Luger, Flair, all that. I mean, even just what he accomplished there, I think, from like 88 to 96 or even 7, if you include the Starrcade stuff, that puts him among the all-time greats, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, was he ever the biggest star in the business? No. But I mean, that's not a requirement to be one of the all-time greats. So the guy clearly was that.
Yeah. Rick Rude, I'd throw in there also. Great matches, Cactus Jack. Again, I mean, unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot of people watching back then. That's sort of like the era I cut my teeth on WCW, was that Sting's run. Jason, what's interesting is when you talk about Sting, or you talk about any like great, it's easy to, we might be talking about The Rock later on, and you hear him do those promos, and you're like, okay, one of the all-time great promos. Or if you're talking about a Bryan Danielson, one of the all-time great technical wrestlers, it's hard to pinpoint what Sting was great at. I mean, he was sort of like, he was never a good promo. He's the first to say it. I think he had a little fun even in his retirement promo there in the ring with it. I think in some ways it helped him in that it was kind of endearing that he was, always a little clumsy on the mic, but very earnest. For me, what really came through with Sting was that he really did always work hard. And I remember being backstage at a TNA show in Orlando. This is have to be like 2008, and Sting was already, I think, well into his 40s by then. So he was already kind of like, the special attraction. And being backstage after he just came through the curtain after a match, and he's breathing heavy and he's sweating, and with some other wrestlers. And I remember him just talking about sort of like, how was it? And it meant so much to him that like he put a good effort out there in front of a few 100,000 fans in Orlando, in Universal Studios in Orlando. So that, and again, right up until this last run where you see 60-something-year-old Sting, jumping off ladders or whatever, he never dogged it. That's sort of my take on Sting. What do you think was sort of his calling card?
Yeah, I mean, as you say there, he was never the best technical wrestler. He was never the best on the mic. I think it's his loyalty. And, Brian touched on, he was forever the guy that he was the best and the biggest star not to go to WWE, even though that changed at some point. But it was his loyalty. And I think the big thing about Sting was, as bright and as colorful as the character was, Steve Borden always seemed like a low-key kind of guy, which is why maybe he played second fiddle to a lot of other big stars in the companies he was in, because he didn't seem to complain a lot. He didn't seem to have a huge ego. And I think just the care that he took in his craft is what kind of separated him from a lot of other guys and probably gave him the longevity in his career that he ended up having.
And that's a huge thing, right? I mean, when you talk about what does he have that other wrestlers don't have, just longevity, right? I mean, like, to think that this guy got his start in the mid 80s. I mean, it was the Ultimate Warrior's original tag team partner. And here in 2024, we were seeing him working a main event and working hard. Again, not at all dogging it, and looking good. It's really something incredible. Anyway, you can read more again about Sting in our latest issued interview with him. Kudos to Sting, I think, a rightful part of any Hall of Fame anywhere, and thankfully he's gotten in them all. Let's talk about some other comings and goings in AEW. We saw Will Ospreay, and look, we've seen Will Ospreay a million times. I mean, I guess I don't know how much question there was, but something about sort of what the presentation would be in AEW. Now we got that. Everybody raving about his match with Takeshita at a Revolution. Brian, what do you think about what we saw that night? It looks like they're going right to the big dream match with Danielson at this new pay-per-view they're doing, Dynasty. Does it seem that here in the outset he is off to a good start in AEW?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very much like what we talked about leading up to it when we were sort of trying to predict where he might wind up or where he would be at his best. And I think this, more than anything, this really represents, for better or worse, AEW really leaning into what they're known for, what they do best, what their reputation is, the dream matches, the great technical wrestlers, the observer worldview kind of thing. Like, that's their thing. They're leaning into it. It's not, I mean, personally, subjectively, it's not my favorite thing in the world. Like, I have to say, I thought the Ospreay and match from the pay-per-view was entertaining. It's not my kind of thing. It's like, to me, it's like watching a video game. I feel like it's just crazy move. Nobody's selling anything. People taking insane types of things and then just getting up because they get up. Because why? Because they have to do their next move. And yeah, you watch it and it's like, wow, 10 out of 10, awesome. Like if I'm at the Olympics and all that, figure skating, but it's just not, it doesn't get me in my guts. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not on the edge of my seat. There are matches that do that for me. There were matches on that card that do that for me. I watch a match like this and I get, well, whatever. I'm a middle-aged man, whatever you want to say. I'm an old man, as my kids say. The thing I keep thinking, I get annoyed the more as the match goes on, because I'm going like, oh, that was your finish. Come on. That was your finish right there. What's the matter with you guys? That's the damn finish. And I just keep doing that with every false finish. So it's just not my thing. But like I always say, You have to separate your personal tastes from business. And if it works for their business, that's great. But again, it seems like they're catering to that core that they have. And that's what they're happy with, and that's what this represents to me.
And you're absolutely right. And I don't know that it's working that well for their business, right? I mean, they have what they have, and the Will Ospreay fans are happy to see it. I mean, it's super serving an audience that you already have. And I totally agree. And it's like it's hard to watch that match, or really any Will Ospreay match, and be anything other than complimentary. And that, like, yes, in as much as his job is to deliver a good performance in that match, he did that, and he does like really exciting moves and all that. But it really is that, like, that's the part of me, and I think this is going to come up when talking about some others too, that is a little disappointed seeing him in AEW. Is like, I feel like we already know this about Will Ospreay. I mean, what we're seeing is like, this is the Will Ospreay we know, and what I'm interested in is how much he can grow. Now, I'll say he I guess it was the next week on TV, he cut a promo, and it was a fiery promo, and I think I want to see more of that. I mean, essentially, I want to see more of the personality. I think that's what's been missing over the years. Not that he can't do it, because he can. Maybe he was somewhat hamstrung over the years in Japan. Both that there weren't a lot of American fans watching his work over there, and working in front of Japanese audiences maybe limits how much you can show that personality with that language barrier. So, again, I can watch, I'll never be surprised seeing Will Ospreay in a 5-star match. That's what we know he can do. I want to see what else he can do. Jason, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, look, I think, there was a lot of debate about where Will was going to end up. I still think AEW is the right place for him to be able to do what he wants to do. I think the WWE system would have just been too restrictive on what he wants to do. With the signing of him, and later with Okada, and now Mercedes Mone, it's great, and it's created some buzz for AEW. My concern is where they go with all of these people next. And yes, 5-star matches is great, and we can lean into that, and that's the company that AEW is. And I do think it's right for them to pursue that, but it's what makes it matter 6 months from now or a year from now. Are they all just going to be people on the roster? Is Will Ospreay just another guy on the roster, regardless of whether or not he's the world champion? It's how they follow through with this, so I'm interested to see where it goes.
Yeah. You mentioned the other two. Definitely want to talk about them. I guess I'm a lot more critical of certainly Okada's debut. I don't want to overstate things, but I was just completely underwhelmed by the decision to bring him in, pair him with the Elite. You are ready. I mean, here's a guy who may be the greatest Japanese wrestler of all time, or at least you can tell that story, whether it's true or not. And they plug him into essentially a 6-man act, coming in, playing. I'm not loving the Young Bucks act these days, and we could bicker, and I think they did a great job with Sting. I really do. So nothing but complimentary there. But you come off of losing to Sting, and Sting's not even selling their finish. I think like twice, right? And then beats them clean, and so. And that's fine, and it's honorable that they did that. But now you got to rehab them a little bit, and so the decision is to pair Okada with them. I mean, like it's almost immediately sort of defining him down somewhat. I just don't like that. I don't love Okada as a heel. I don't doubt that he could do it, but I mean, I think like we know what Okada brings to the table, and I just think this is not a natural fit, and I'm not at all a fan of it. Brian.
Oh, sorry.
All right, Brian, go ahead.
I'm conflicted on it, because I think it's almost like a can't win scenario, because I can understand maybe why they did it, because we were even talking about the question sometimes of how much impact is someone like this going to have? Like, will fans understand who he is, or how important he is, or what he's done in the past? Like how many of the fans will get that? And so this might have been a way to sort of say, okay, we're going to try to make you relevant right out of the gate. Even fans who may not know about your accomplishments, now you're hooked up with the elite. You're hooked up with the Young Bucks. We're a proven commodity here. Like I'm playing devil's advocate here of trying to think about why they might have done that. Because I think then the other alternative would have been you bring him in, which they have proven they're not that great at. You bring him in and you establish who he is on his own and why we should care about him, instead of just Excalibur going, oh my God, it's Kazuchika Okada. And you know what I mean? That kind of thing. They haven't been that great about that in the past. So maybe this was a way to try to, I don't know, get him going the minute he hits the ground. I think it's one of those scenarios where you got to wait and see how it plays out in this particular case. I mean, I think you could definitely, he's definitely the biggest Japanese wrestling star of the 21st century. That's not even debatable, So, I mean, could it be a giant fumble? Yes. I mean, because I like you, I agree that the Bucks stuff is a little bit, what they're doing right now is kind of, I don't know what quite they're going for. I think it's sort of like, again, it's CM Punk booking AEW from afar. It's like, okay, everybody hates us now, and they think we're jerks because of CM Punk. So we're gonna be the people that CM Punk is trying to make people think we are. Like, again, it's just this weird game that they're playing. I don't know. I'm hoping that it works out for him. Again, I think like he is somebody, Okada, that might have. I don't think Ospreay is, but I think he might have been better served in WWE.
I agree, 100%.
Especially at this point of his career. Maybe not in his prime, where he really was all about the 5-star matches and things, but at this point in his career, where he might want to be taking it a little bit easier, physically, I think WWE would have been the place for him.
Yeah, I agree 1,000%. And the thing about Okada is, you look at him. And if you're not familiar with his work, he doesn't have a spectacular physique or anything. He doesn't speak English very well. So you've got to do the job of sort of educating the fans of why this guy is special. And I think AEW, because they've got the smart fans, are taking for granted that everybody already knows it. And so you just kind of bring him out as Okada, and it's like, oh, everybody's going to go crazy because this is Okada and he has a lot of great matches. Where I think he really would have benefited from some production, from video packages, weeks and weeks of video packages. And AEW can do this, get the footage, the many Tokyo Dome main events and all the titles and tell that story and build it up. And they just didn't. I agree. I think I know what they were going for, and I get it. It's like the Elite is a big brand in AEW, and by inserting him in it, you're sort of automatically, right away, you're saying that this guy is a big deal. He's big enough to be inserted in our biggest faction. I think it's a little bit, I don't know what the word is, but I don't think the Elite is as big a deal as some might think it is. So it felt a little bit sort of self-indulgent, like, Okada is such a big deal that we're going to let him into the Elite right out of the gate. And it's just like,
yeah, but in AEW, though, wouldn't you say, though, in AEW, they are a big deal? I mean,
yes, absolutely.
AEW, yes. To the fans and everything, they are.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again.
But I think part of the Elite, different than other just wrestling factions, is that, and I know this has sort of evolved over the years, but the idea was that it was more than a faction, but it was sort of like the Clique. Remember in the mid-'90s, where it was a real group of wrestling influencers, power brokers, that kind of thing at its core. And it's not the kind of thing that you could just kind of like insert guys and remove guys. That's the part that I don't love, treating it as just like a faction,
Well, the Okada connection to that group is really through Kenny Omega. You could make that argument, but I mean, he hasn't even been a part of this really. So, I mean, but that would be the connection, with him and Omega in New Japan and all that stuff, where you could sort of sell it as, he kind of already was in that clique. You just haven't seen him yet, that kind of thing. Yeah. But again, that's not really how it's been presented. So
yeah, Jason. I was just gonna say. I mean, I don't think it's at all the kind of thing like, oh, they botched it, it can't be salvaged. I just think out of the gate they stumbled a little bit.
it kind of feels a little bit like new toy syndrome, where the Bucks have said, "Oh, here's Okada, and we want to play with him first," and regardless of whether it makes sense to the overall presentation. I mean, yes, the vast majority of the AEW audience will know who Okada is, but that still doesn't mean that you can't have him straight out of the gate appear and stare down Samoa Joe for the world title, because that instantly takes away any doubt of, okay, here's a big deal, as opposed to, okay, this guy's come over from New Japan and he's a 6-man tag wrestler. Okay.
Yeah, and again, mixing him up with Eddie Kingston, which I'm sure they could have great matches, but it just felt a little, and also even literally the placement kind of in the middle of that show, it just felt like, and I think to some extent because of Ospreay, because they knew they had Mercedes in a couple of weeks, maybe they thought like, let's not sort of like over deliver here, or in too many of these big debuts. So I think they held back a little bit with it. It just feels like they didn't get as much of it, as much out of it as they could have. They didn't, frankly, treat it as big a deal as they should have, and I think again some of it was that they were already had their eyes set on Mercedes. Let's talk about that. The next big arrival, and again, AEW's had, you got to give them the credit. I mean, they've been real busy signing some really big names. I'd love to see what that payroll is these days. But we had the long-awaited Mercedes debut. Not exactly a surprise here in Boston. They sort of branded the whole event around her. I'm sort of in between here. I was very high on Sting, very low on Okada. The treatment. Mercedes, I was like, it was fine. I guess I was a little underwhelmed. It wasn't anything unlike we've seen a million times. I think the one thing, I think some of it didn't quite ring true to me. I think she's sort of trying to convince fans that this is where I wanted to be. This is the place to be. And I think some of that doesn't really ring true, because we know she was negotiating with WWE, and we know that for the right price, she and I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I believe, all things being equal, she'd rather be in WWE. And I don't know that I really got like a mission statement from her for AEW. I've got my eyes on you, and I know she talked about a Willow, and there's some history there. I don't know how much it really means. It's all to say, again, scale 1 to 10 in terms of debuts, it might have been a 6 for me.
Well, I think, it's an example to me, again, of I think part of the problem is there are some people who really need to have promos that are scripted for them in wrestling. And I'm not saying that to be snarky or as a joke. I think, there are many talents that can just go and riff and can be captivating and make and clearly communicate in a charismatic way, and shouldn't be hamstrung by having to be tied to a script every week. I don't think she's one of those people. I think she's very much a product of that modern day, NXT, WWE system, where it's like a lot of those people probably couldn't even, stand up and tell you their life story unless somebody wrote it down for them on a piece of paper. And I think that hurt the debut, in my opinion. She just seemed lost out there from in terms of like what she should have been saying, or how she should have been engaging that crowd. It just didn't feel it felt natural, but it felt natural in not a good way. It felt natural in a bad way to me. And I think that might have been what made it such an underwhelming kind of thing. Also, knowing what we know, the behind the scenes stuff, like you said, which I guess, not everybody knows, that she probably, she wanted to go to WWE. They wouldn't offer the same kind of money that Tony Khan was offering. So she's here. And it almost seems like a bigger version of the Trinity Impact thing, where I think like she did great things there. And I think she did really well there. But you could just tell, and I mean, it was, now we can see obviously clearly that it was just sort of like a biding my time kind of a thing. And that feels sort of like what this is. I don't know if the Willow Nightingale thing is really going to connect, because that was something that was over the New Japan Strong title. Again, I know even from seeing reactions online that there were people who were like, what history with Willow Nightingale? Like, what is she talking about? That kind of thing. So I don't know. I think it's going to be one of those situations where this is, again, biding time until she can go back to WWE for whatever, kind of offer that they give her at some point.
And that's the biggest issue, I think, with Mercedes or much of anyone, is that look, I think they're trying their best, but it's still not the deepest women's division. Both in there's no lack of talent there, but the reality is that there is a lack of star power. I mean, I guess you got Tony, who's done a really good job of getting herself over as a star. Britt's on the sidelines. I'd certainly put Britt there as a star. It's a big drop off from there. I mean, again, you've got great workers and Deanna Pratt and so many others. Yes. But they're, what are the marquee matches? She talked about being the first woman to headline a pay-per-view. That's true. And she headlined a WrestleMania. Where is the opportunity for Mercedes to headline in AEW? I mean, they could just make the decision that she's a big enough star that you put her in the main event spot. But I don't know that there are those obvious marquee matches for her.
Well, on the positive side of it, Jason, I'm sorry, I'll let you talk in a second. But on the positive side with her is she is the biggest women's star, I think, that they've ever had in the company. Yes. I mean, she's the biggest name. She's the kind of person that you can build a division around if you really handle it well. I think she's probably a bigger star than the majority of the men wrestling in the company.
Absolutely.
And that is a potential that you have to strike and do something with. But it shows you where we're at right now with AEW, that we have this sort of like PTSD of just like all the times we've seen, them have this opportunity. But again, they can do something special with her if it's handled the right way, in the women's division.
Yeah. It helped that it was a packed arena, right? I mean, she looked like in that a setting, she looked like a big star, loaded arena, people going crazy for her hometown crowd. The reality is, and I think this is what's affected Adam Copeland some, is like you go in there with this reputation as being a top guy, and I worry about this for all these guys, Ospreay, Okada, and the reality is, on any given week, she's going to be performing in an arena that is 3/4 empty. And I'm not trying to, be a naysayer, but that's just the reality of where AEW's business is right now. So they've got their work cut out for them in getting her over as the level of star that at one point, I thought she was on pace to being the greatest American women wrestler of all time. I was that high on Sasha Banks. I mean, I thought she was that great a performer in WWE, and she's still, I think she's 30, 31, something like that. So certainly the ability is there. I think it's a bit of an uphill climb because of the infrastructure around her in AEW's women's division. Jason.
Yeah, it's now or never for AEW's women's division, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, he talks a good game, Mr. Khan does, whenever he's talking about trying to book this and how important the women's division is. But what Tony presents on screen is very different to how he talks about it. With Mercedes Mone, they have the chance now to actually say, this is a serious division that we care about and we're going to push really hard. But my problem with it is the same thing I mentioned about Ospreay and Okada and everyone else. 6 months from now, what's to stop them being just another person? It's weird that when someone goes to WWE, WWE has a way of making that person appear bigger than they may actually be star-wise. AEW almost has the opposite effect. They kind of take a bit of the shine off people when they come there. I mean, it was a big deal when Saraya came back to wrestling, and now she's another woman there, mostly in backstage segments. Taya Valkyrie, was doing great work. She's had a handful of matches in the year that she's been in AEW, and she's just kind of feeling forgotten about. So I hope that the star power of Mercedes Mone makes it that doesn't happen. But Tony Khan really needs to follow through and make sure that it doesn't happen.
Yeah. And one of the things that we've talked about, I think, is an issue, and you could say it's a good problem to have, but that roster is so huge. Overflowing. Yeah, it's just numbers wise, there's so many people that on any given time it's so difficult to really showcase someone. And granted, now they've got I guess 3 shows if you're counting Rampage, but 2 sort of A shows with Dynamite and Collision. So you could spread it out. And I am mindful of coming off negative because I think AEW still has a really terrific product, and happy to see, it's good for everyone that they're giving WWE a run for their money as much as they are. So let's switch over to talking about WWE. Again, we are here in WrestleMania season, and I imagine we'll do more of a real WrestleMania preview. But the card is taking shape. I think we know most of I was thinking, like, who's not on the show yet. So I think we don't have quite a complete card. Bianca doesn't have a match yet, and there are a few others, but we have most of a card. We now know definitively, and even up until our last show, we were still trying to figure out what this main event was on both nights. We now know it is Cody and Roman night 2. We've got the tag team match in night 1. One thing that maybe we didn't anticipate is the stipulation. So what happens in that first night will affect the second night. I think The Rock, again, and Jason has talked about it, when, one of those moments where you call in the wife or the kids or something. That was, for me, the Rock's Maui line at the end of Friday Night SmackDown, talking to Cody's mom, where he does the line from Moana. I popped huge. So, I just think he's doing great. I don't know. He seems to be enjoying it, but also I think it's tough for him to commit, kind of go full heel, because he is so charismatic. So at the same time that he's trying to be a jerk, he's trading I love yous with fans and all that stuff. But Brian, why don't we start there? What do you think of what we've gotten out of The Rock, this heel Rock, which was something that I don't know that we saw coming. And it's crazy to me just that he's like a guy on wrestling every week now, more than Roman, the Rock has become kind of like a regular part of the show.
I think, the required viewing to me are I'm not even just talking about what's on the show, but the promos that he's been putting on social media are among the greatest wrestling promos that anyone has ever done in the history of professional wrestling. And I can really feel confident in saying that because I've seen most of the great ones do it. Where he's unfettered by the confines of the show. He's not taking time away from any other wrestlers. He's not, there's no language restrictions. Obviously, he's not taking up the show. So he can go for 10, 15, 20 minutes and it's gold from beginning to end. And he's a genius. And I think he's doing the best promo work he has ever done in his career. And the reason I say that is because the one knock on him always was, oh, he's great and he's funny and everything, but it's just a bunch of catchphrases. It's just like a bunch of like catchy, things that Brian Gewirtz wrote for him or whatever. And Brian Gewirtz may still be writing it for him, but now it's real impassioned stuff. It's a character in a movie or a TV show speaking. It's not just, I'm going to hit all these things so you chant along with me. It feels so real and authentic now. The flip side of this is that I just feel in my gut my prophecy finally coming true, which is that Cody Rhodes is coming off weak, ineffectual, lame, almost to the point where I feel that it's intentional. I feel that they are, for whatever reason, trying to do this on purpose. Because if they're not trying to do it, then it just shows a complete lack of awareness. You're talking about The Rock being the coolest guy in the room, the most macho guy, Cody crying on television, again, talking about his mother. I love Cody, but this is not, how else are the fans supposed to take this? Now you're coming into WrestleMania, you're coming into Philadelphia, for crying out loud. And I know many of the people there will not be from Philadelphia, but this will be a large portion of people from Philadelphia who already hate baby faces and love heels. I could see a scenario where he gets destroyed by the crowd in this match. You have the Cody crybaby thing getting over. You have The Rock saying F your story repeatedly online, which I wouldn't be surprised if that becomes a chant, a live chant. It's great, entertaining stuff. He is magnetic. You can't take your eyes off of him. But I keep thinking, like, man, they're really going out of their way to make sure that people just abandon Cody Rhodes. And I don't know why. To the point where even if he does win now and gets the belt, like, what is that going to mean? He's coming out of it. It's almost like they're saying, okay, little guy, here's your belt. You're happy now? You could show it to your mom. Yay, you're the champion. Like, how is he going to come out strong out of this? I don't know.
Yeah. Jason, you feel the same? I mean, Cody's still getting the big pops. It is going to be tough to outshine The Rock, but he has. And the reason we're here at all was because fans rejected Roman versus Rock and wanted Cody instead. Now, granted, another thing that I don't know that we could have anticipated was that what that served to do was sort of motivate The Rock, I think, to like, well, I'll show you I'm as good as a performer as I ever was or more. And yeah, I think we're all seeing a level of investment and dedication from The Rock that nobody could have anticipated for a guy who probably makes more from one movie than he'll make all year working for WWE. So yeah, I mean, to see this level of investment is surprising. You do wonder though if it kind of works against the goal here of putting that spotlight on Cody.
I think it does. I think that investment and that dedication from The Rock is starting to hurt. And I think last week it was really noticeable. I thought Cody's promo on Raw, where he talked about his mother and where he cried, was quite good and was quite heartfelt. And then The Rock came out on Friday night and just crapped all over it.
Yes.
And had the crowd with him on it. And I think,
yes.
That was the first moment where I went, right, okay, this is not good.
That really bothered me when that happened, that the crowd actually, and I don't even know if The Rock thought it was going to get that response, that the crowd was chanting his name over him humiliating Cody Rhodes' mother. I mean, that is, from a booking standpoint, I don't know if that's what they want. I mean, if it is, then it's confusing to me.
I think if you had stuck with, the Roman Reigns method of where The Rock only appears certain weeks, and when he comes out, he runs down the town and acknowledges Roman as his tribal chief and kept it at that. But now The Rock has been so committed to this that he's coming out and he's doing the most entertaining stuff he has done in a decade or more, maybe a couple of decades.
And he's a real pro, and this is the thing that gets me is in a situation like that, like what we just saw, which was a great promo, with talking about his mom and everything. He is a pro. He knows how, if he wants to turn that crowd on him at that moment. When the crowd is like eating out of the palm of his hands, he knows damn well how to turn around and make that crowd hate him instantly. He can do it, but he didn't do it. He played into it. Again, it's a weird reaction that he did it that way, because I know that he could do it differently if he wanted to. It's just that's why I mean when I say, like, it almost feels like it's on purpose.
Yeah. And the one name that we're really barely talking about is Roman Reigns, who in some ways should be bigger than all of them. He almost becomes an afterthought in all this. And that's the thing, all this back and forth between Cody and The Rock, that's not the match, right? I mean, it is a part of a match on night one, but yeah, you'd think they're building to The Rock and Cody Rhodes at WrestleMania. Any thoughts on the stipulation? I assume Rock and Roman are winning that first night, because the story works better if the odds are stacked against Cody on night two, and you get to have The Rock at ringside for the main event. So it certainly makes sense that the heels win night one to stack the deck on night two.
Well, I thought of one. I think that's probably the more likely one, but I think you could do something with either outcome, because I was really, when they were talking about it, I really thought about the two ways it could go, because I felt like, they've made it very clear that this is all Rock's idea. And you already have the idea of Roman having that resentment, like The Rock is taking my spotlight. Now he's, he says I'm the tribal chief, but it's not really how he's acting. So potentially I thought, well, if they lose that first night, if Rock and Roman lose, and then Roman is stuck out there by himself with no help and gets beat finally because he has no help, which proves that he was, couldn't do it on his own, that's something he could then use on The Rock and say, you did this to me. You made this stipulation. I didn't agree to this, and you stuck me out there by myself, and now I lost. And that could be fuel for Rock Roman potentially. But I still think it's more likely the scenario you laid out.
Well, the other fuel for Rock Roman is The Rock turning on Roman on night 2, right? So he's there at ringside, and whether this whole thing he was a double agent or what have you, and ultimately helps Cody, or he just loses his cool with Roman that night. Jason, do you see that happening? Could that closing image of WrestleMania 40 be The Rock and Cody celebrating together in the ring?
I think it will be. I think there's been enough subtle and sometimes less than subtle hints that The Rock is maybe a double agent, and the fact that he threw out a few weeks ago that Dusty Rhodes was one of his heroes. He made a point of saying that, and things that got implied he's not going to screw Dusty's son in the biggest moment. So I don't know. I came on this podcast almost a year ago, and I said I was okay with Cody losing last year if that was Rocky, and this is Rocky 2, where he finally gets the big win. But it's been so bizarrely booked that it's just not been a straight Rocky 2. They've pulled in other movies into this, and Seth Rollins is involved now, and it's been so all over the place. It's so
like a Rocky 5.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say something on that, because it really comes down to just all the details of and people have been watching closely. And maybe this is just me, because I'm a huge Cody fan and I want him to do well, and I'm pulling for him. And I think it's great to see like a true, what they used to call a white meat baby face, like a pure good guy getting over like this and being such a huge deal. And I don't want them to mess it up. Even things like, you have The Rock slaps Cody right at that press event, and it's this huge moment. And they do the where he retaliates, but even that, it just felt to me so restrained. Like The Rock is out there trashing Cody, embarrassing him, calling him a mistake, and all this kind of thing. And even through all that, Cody, whether he's coached to do this or not, he's so conflicted. Should I hit him? Should I do this? He's looking to the crowd. Should I fight back? And it's like, no, damn it, just punch the guy in the face. It should have been the second, and maybe I'm nitpicking, the second those words left Rock's mouth, the instant before even the last syllable, that slap should have come right across his face. It's like, how don't you dare say something like that, instead of just like, should I do it now? Is this, do I have permission? He looks at Seth like, what are you looking at Seth for? Just hit the guy. That's my gut reaction to these things. He's got to be stronger,
Yeah. What do you think of Seth's role in this whole thing? Does it just feel like we need a fourth guy, and so we're going to kind of like insert this guy? Obviously, like the storyline isn't as organic with Seth and any of these guys. I guess the one guy who's got sort of the most history. I know there's the Shield stuff, but really that's sort of ancient history. He's got some history with Cody, obviously. So I think that kind of works. But, and I think the other thing that they're trying to thread that is difficult is having Seth balance two feuds at the same time. And inevitably, one is going to kind of get the short shrift. And I think they're sort of like leaning into that, with him even telling Drew, you're sort of the least of my worries. And maybe that sets up that he does get beat because he didn't take Drew seriously enough. But what do you see, Jason, as Seth's role in this storyline and in that tag match? Again, is he just another body, or do you think that he could play an intricate role?
That's what I mean. I think it's so messy that I don't know if Seth was ever planned to be involved with this, and now he is, but they're trying to balance that with, I think, what was reportedly meant to be the title match between Seth and Punk at WrestleMania, and then Punk gets hurt, so now they have Drew in there, which I think is an excellent choice. I think Drew is doing the best work of his career, hands down. It's really, really good. But in terms of the tag match, Seth seems like another guy who's just been thrown in there because we need another body, as you say. I have a friend who is convinced that Seth is turning on Cody in the tag match.
It happened. Yeah.
Is going to hand the win to Roman and Rock, and then night 2 will play out however it plays out. Which great if that happens, but I don't know. It just feels awkward. And as Brian said, Cody's looking at Seth for like advice almost in these scenarios, and it's, what are you doing? This is weird. So, yeah, I don't know how it plays out.
Even with The Rock, right? I mean, The Rock's out there and he's cutting these really vicious promos on Cody, and then he sort of feels like they need to throw Seth something too, and you're a walking clown show emoji or something. But it's like it feels a little artificial.
Well, to me, it seems it's as clear cut as You have Rock and Roman on one side. You have Cody on the other. You want to do a big tag match at Mania, and it sort of is like, well, who could we put in that's worthy of being in a match like that? Well, okay, we have Seth Rollins. He's the world champion. That's a pretty big deal. Okay, let's put him with Cody. Like, I think that is probably the long and short of it.
Yeah.
Let's figure out a way to book that. Okay, great. Let's do it, you know?
Yeah. What do you think of the rest of the card taking shape? I mean, when you compare it to where we thought we would be some months ago, I don't know if it's disappointing, but a lot, just because of circumstance, a lot of things fell through. We're not going to, it looks like we would have had Gunther and Brock Lesnar. Obviously, that's not happening. We were going to have Seth and CM Punk, which would have been a huge match. That's not happening. So now it does become about sort of like spare parts, like who's around, LA Knight, you need an opponent. All right, let's give you AJ Styles. We've got Logan Paul and Randy Orton and Kevin Owens with nothing to do. Let's put you in a triple threat match. So it feels like there's some of that. Gunther and Sami Zayn are both doing great work, but it does to some extent feel a little bit like, again, spare parts. What do you think, Jason?
Yeah, I think a lot of the matches, they've tried to make the best of some bad situations they've had, obviously with the Lesnar stuff and with the Punk injury. I think they've stumbled onto something good with the Drew thing, as I was saying. I think Drew and Seth is a great one, and could go either way. You could have Drew win the belt, and he's got redemption.
I think Drew's winning it.
Yeah. Then do you have Damian Priest cash in on him straight away and cost him the belt, and then that continues. Drew, been able to complain about this, and he gets screwed again. I think I would like to see Drew actually have a title run at this point because he's been doing such good work. I think the women's matches they've set up have been fine. Bayley has the built-in story with Io there, although even with that, it's almost like Bayley's feud is with Dakota and Damage Control to a bigger extent than maybe it is Io. And then you've got Rhea and Becky having a match, which is great. And that'll be a big-time match. The two biggest stars that they have there in the women's division, they'll come across well. A lot of the other ones, I don't know how thrilled I am about, LA Knight and AJ Styles at this point. If it wasn't TNA 2012, it's
yeah. The 6-man ladder, the 6-team ladder match should be a spectacle and nothing else. And I actually like having one of those on WrestleMania. Whether it was the original Money in the Bank being a fixture at WrestleMania, I've got no problem with like that crash and burn tag team match. And it's a way to get the tag titles on the card with some prominence, because I don't know what you would have done otherwise. And any thoughts, Brian, on what do you do with that? Do you just assume they retain? I could see it putting on New Catch Republic getting over pretty well, and I imagine they'll be in this match.
They are getting over really well. I mean, it feels like it's definitely Judgment Day's definitely had it for a long time. When you think about it, because Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, they won it at last year's WrestleMania. And, I know it went back and forth a couple of times, but that's how it got to Judgment Day. So, this has been quite a run. It might be time for a little bit of a change in a match like that. And like you said, it's one of those matches where, too, the other function is it gets people on the card. It's how they used to have the hardcore, the 24/7s, the hardcore matches, they're all the different battle royals and things. It gets people on the card. So, I'm not mad at it.
One match I'm surprised, and it is happening, and we expected it to happen. It doesn't feel like nearly the big deal that I think people thought it would be is Uso versus Uso, right? It just feels like it's going to be a mid-card match somewhere. I think like the direction they've taken it is sort of weird, where they just had Jay sort of challenge Jimmy and Jimmy accept, and that's it. We're just doing it. So I'm not loving that. And anything else you anticipate, Jason? What are we missing? Nia Jax isn't announced for anything yet. Jade Cargill, Bianca.
I personally would love to see Jade and Bianca. If they can find a way of setting up that match before them, I think it would be tremendous. I think it presents Jade as a big star in her first match. I think Bianca is talented enough to be able to carry her and make up for any kind of shortcomings Jade might have during that. I would love to see that one. Aside from that, I don't know. It kind of feels like, I don't know whether there's so much focus on the main event and the tag match with Rock and everyone that the rest of the card seems a little bit lacking in star power, maybe. I'm curious to see what else they can add to it before then.
Yeah. But a good card. I mean, not at all. It should be fun. I don't mind if maybe they keep it. I think they've announced maybe 7 or 8 matches now, and maybe you get to 5 big matches a night plus all the spectacle. I think that's fine. I'd be happy with that. Real quick before we head on out here to throw it to the interview, let's talk a little bit about the Hall of Fame. So we've got Paul Heyman, which I think a lot of people expected, being in Philadelphia. He's sort of the headline act this year. The U.S. Express, which I would not have expected, but I really like. I think that's kind of a neat touch. And there's not a lot of WrestleMania 1 acts that you could still induct. So I think that's really cool. Happy to see. I guess Wyndham's already in it with the Horsemen, but happy to see Rotunda get in there. Thunderbolt Patterson. Who else are we missing? Bull Nakano, kind of a weird one because, didn't have a huge career in WWE, but she did have a great career, but, had a cup of coffee essentially in WWE. And who else?
Ali.
Muhammad Ali, of course. Yeah, kind of the celebrity. What do you think of that class, Brian?
I like it. Pete, someone else was asking me about this, and obviously this is the first post Vince McMahon class of the Hall of Fame where it's not just Vince picking the names that he wants. It's a little bit different, because some people have said, well, it doesn't feel like it's as big of a deal and all this. But I like the fact that in the past, it was always like we have this giant headliner that we're going to pick, and everything else is going to kind of be an afterthought. And even sometimes the headliner will be like a head scratcher, like this is a really big star, but not really who I would have thought, but we need a big headliner. So there was like this sense of like, we need a giant name. And I feel like this is a much more measured kind of selection. It feels a little bit more serious, like, not as much of just looking at it as a TV show and really thinking about, okay, Heyman is a great choice. The U.S. Express, I feel like that to me is lining up for Bray Wyatt to go in. I think that's
this
the
year.
Idea. No, I think probably next year. I think what the thinking to me seems to be, and again, this feels like a very Triple H, Paul Levesque thing that Vince wouldn't care less about. The idea of, well, if we're going to put Bray Wyatt in, his father should go in first, I think. I think that's the thinking here, that Mike Rotunda should go in first. Do we induct him as IRS? That maybe would come off a little bit goofy. Or do we do, like, even though it's lesser known, what connects to the first WrestleMania? Do we do it with Wyndham as a tag team? I think that probably was the thinking there. Bull Nakano is, an incredible women's talent. She has a great legacy. I mean, she did great things. She had, like you said, a very brief moment in the WWF. It was very memorable, though. I think her and Medusa, Alundra Blaze, were probably having the best matches in the company at the time. I do think there are, Leilani Kai is not in yet. I mean, talk about the first.
Is she not in?
No, she's not.
Okay, because remember they did like those legacy Hall of Fames where they would just dump everybody in there.
I'm gonna double check, but I don't think that she's in even the legacy. But I mean, I'm wrong. Sorry, 2018.
Is she in?
Never mind. Yeah,
as in the legacy.
I'm looking at 20. It says here 2018.
I'm guessing. Yeah, she went in with like a 30.
No. I'm sorry. No, not at all. Not at all. Not in the Hall of Fame at all.
Not in the Hall of Fame. Okay.
No. And so, I mean, like, she's just an example that popped in my head of people that probably should be looked at first that contributed to the company if you're looking for that female inductee. But, and Muhammad Ali, I mean, as far as celebrity inductees go, he reminds me a little bit of the Andy Kaufman one where it's like, yeah, this is somebody who was a celebrity and had significant moments in wrestling. It wasn't just somebody, it wasn't William Shatner. I love William Shatner. I'm a huge Star Trek fan, but it wasn't somebody that showed up for 5 minutes on a Raw one time and they're a big name. Like, this is somebody who, you got the first WrestleMania, you got the Inoki fight, you got, the Korea show. I mean, like, he has a history connected to pro wrestling, Gorilla Monsoon, the things like that. So, I mean, again, they feel like very sensible choices, which I like.
Yeah, I've got no complaints about any of them. Cyndi Lauper's a name that I still don't know how they haven't gotten to, in terms of celebrity.
I mean, she was, to me, she was even more important than Mr. T in terms of mainstream celebrities that helped get the WWF over at that time. she was a bigger deal than Mr. T was, in my opinion. It was close.
And I've got to think they've made the overture, and for whatever reason they haven't been able to figure it out yet. Because I don't think there's any ill will that I know. I mean, I know she did an appearance about 15 years ago on Raw.
Yeah, with Wendy Richter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyhow, all right, guys, thank you so much. We'll be back in a moment, but right now let me throw to our interview with the proprietor of Kayfabe News, and he's got a movie coming out. The Ref didn't see it. This is. Let me make sure I get. I know Colin's name, but do you remember his his filmmaking partner? Here it is, Sarah Geidlinger. Okay, so here is Colin Hunter and Sarah Geidlinger. All right, now my very special guest. Very happy to be joined by, I think for the first time in 9 years. I think you were in the first year we were doing the PWI podcast. My old friend Colin Hunter of Kayfabe News and his filmmaking partner Sarah Geidlinger. They're working on a documentary that we're going to talk about here in a moment. But first, just want to catch up with Colin. What's up, buddy? How are you?
I'm great, and it's wonderful to be back. As you know, I was a kid who grew up reading PWI magazine, and then I got to write for PWI, and then to be on the PWI podcast with yourself and others. It's a thrill. It really, like, to be even involved with a magazine that was, like, to me, the New York Times or the Sports Illustrated as a kid. Like, that was the publication of note. To have any association with it, I love it.
Oh, I agree. And again, I've got a day job in the journalism business. But yeah, this is the one that's like the dream job, you know. Yeah. So I totally. What our times overlapped writing. So what years were you writing for PWI?
Oh man, that's a good question. I want to say like 2005 to 2010, roughly there. It was never a super rigid regular thing, but when they had an article with me in mind, I think every issue of, not necessarily PWI, but one of the magazines, there was 3 or 4, you know, The Wrestler and Inside Wrestling. For a while there, I was thrilled. You know, the secret was they didn't have to pay me any money because I would have done it for free. But I know. I'll keep. Yeah, they didn't. And I think I actually got to go to the PWI office just once.
Yeah.
I was in Bluebell, Pennsylvania, and even that, like, looking through the archives and meeting some of the people who are real, and then some of the people who are maybe their reality is in question. Even the editors at PWI kept up kayfabe even when I was there. They said, "Oh yeah, Matt Brock, he's just out to lunch." And
right,
Hunter's on assignment. Yeah.
Was there something in particular that they would like call on you for? Because in like my early years in PWI, I sort of became the Ring of Honor guy. I don't know why, but if there was a Ring of Honor story, it would come to me.
Yeah.
Was there something that was sort of your specialty at the magazine?
My specialty sort of become what was known as the Editors Roundtable.
Oh, those are great.
A discussion between 4 or 5 different people, all in the magazine editorial board. And I hope I'm not like blowing kayfabe too much out of the water.
That's fine.
These conversations were somewhat fabricated, elaborate.
Those were a great exercise, right? Because like to capture the voice of different writers and have like this back and forth. I did a few of those. Those were fun.
I loved it. Writing dialogue is harder than people think, and writing convincing dialogue that does match each character's voice, even when some of those characters may not be real. That was a real joy writing those. And I would write some features. I remember my first one was about the Dudley Boys. And Spike.
My very first feature for PWI was about the Dudley Boys.
Oh, wow. I wonder if that's the initiation story.
Yeah.
I was so naive that Stu Sachs said, "Hey, Colin, we've got this idea. We want you to write about how Spike is trying to redeem himself among his brothers." And I said, "Okay, should I interview them? How do I do this?" And that's when Stu told me that I could sort of take some creative license with it. And I remember then meeting the Dudley Boys and showing them the story in PWI about them. And, you know, they knew the deal. They're like, I never said that, but they played along with it. And Spike said, "Boy, I'm really angry about this, aren't I?"
Yeah. And suffice to say, somewhere along the lines like that's changed. And like I've told the story. I remember doing a story. This is probably already close to 10 years ago. And doing that, like just fabricating a quote and hearing from Stu, like, "Did you talk to this guy?" And I was like, "No." And it was like, "Oh, it's a new day." Like now, these are all on the up and up. So it's changed. Was there something about your time at PWI that kind of helped you find your voice in kayfabe news as kind of a humorist?
Absolutely. Without doing the PWI writing, first of all, I don't think kayfabe news would have occurred to me to do a satirical news site that's written in the same sort of deadpan journalistic voice as real journalism. And then writing for PWI was practice in writing in that kayfabe style. I'm writing about sometimes the most preposterous ideas and storylines and feuds and rivalries, and writing about them with this absolutely deadpan, straight-faced approach, which was how The Onion does its journalism. And I think you and I both come from a legitimate journalism background, and I think people like us tend to love The Onion because it's funny because it's true kind of thing. Journalism
Right.
has its own language and its own norms, and to take that Onion style and then apply it to wrestling news, I don't think I could have done it had I not been a real newspaper journalist and a PWI writer, where I'm writing about the subject matter with this. It's not tongue in cheek so much as there's just a little wink and a nod in that style. And I tried to do that with kayfabe news. That the joke shouldn't be like, "Here's the punchline, waka waka waka." It should be much more subtle than that.
It's so hard, and that's why I've always been such a big fan and so impressed by your work, because even having all that experience, the legit journalism background, the wrestling background, still 99 out of 100 people are going to fall on their face trying to do that, including myself, and so, and it's not just, here's where I get to just sort of heap praise on you, because it's not just that it's funny, which it is, it's that it's so smart and being so dumb, if that if you get it. And that really is like the highest like form of comedy. It's like, this is so dumb and brilliant,
Yeah.
and it's just great. And it's hard to do, and for every Onion there are a bunch that miss the mark by a mile. And I think the same with kayfabe news. I might have told you this story years ago, but I remember working on like and then on April 1st, this is probably 15 years ago, and some parody site does a story, "Bret Hart is dead," and that was it. That was sort of the extent of it. And then like you get through all that's like, April Fools. I mean, zero comedy. And there are others that are a little better. Which is the one? WrestleCrap, right? WrestleCrap's been around for a long time. They do a decent job. But it's all some of it is too much kind of like on the nose.
I think the challenge for some is that not being true, just not being true isn't enough. Like a lie isn't a joke; it's just a lie. So there was one of those April Fool's type things that came out about Mick Foley. It says Mick Foley dead in car crash, and of course you read it and it's proven wrong. But Mick Foley now, I've been to a couple of his sort of stand-up spoken word things, and he actually uses that as an example. Like when he see me in the audience, he said, "Oh, Colin from Kayfabe News is here." Like, you know how not to do that is just to make up a lie about a car crash. And then so he's sort of praised that idea that it's not done maliciously, and the lie isn't the point. The fact that it's untrue, I'm not tricking people, isn't necessarily the point. The joke is the point. The fact that it tricks people is kind of icing on the cake. If it starts to snowball and people are commenting like, "How can this be true?" And that's always fun when a story sort of takes off. But just publishing something untrue it's very easy and unclever. And I've seen there have been sites that come and go that sort of do the kayfabe news thing, and they usually last about a week before they realize it's harder to do than it looks.
That's sort of like the next evolution of what you did is sort of how social media has exploded and changed, and now so much of it's become like the next level of enjoying your work is going there just to read comments and to get the people. And you do this like with all like good parody stuff, is like half the fun is like, all right, now let's find the people who think this is true and are outraged. So how much fun do you have doing that?
Oh, that's, that's a real sort of extra icing on the cake. You publish these stories, and sometimes social media being what it is, some things take off and some things don't, and some ideas are great and some aren't. But when certain ones take off and get a life of their own, and then you have people out there debunking them or spreading these ideas, and my favorite is when the wrestlers themselves play along and they'll help accentuate a joke. I already mentioned Mick Foley. He and I did a video where he confessed that his fall from Hell in a Cell was completely fake. There's wires and green screen and pillows, and but it worked because he went 100%. He committed to the bit, and when the wrestlers commit to the bits, it helps even more. That they'll help. I did a story. It's a stupid joke, but the joke was that Seth Rollins' middle name isn't Freakin', it's Todd. Which is and so the next day Seth Rollins just posted Seth Todd Rollins on Twitter.
That's great.
So that's pretty satisfying when they get it. And I've seen actually WWE on TV, they'll take a joke or an element of a joke and use it on TV, which is, it doesn't happen all that often, but it's very satisfying when it does.
Is the flip side of that, because of the whole rise of like fake news and misinformation, that you've got to be a little more careful? I mean, does it affect the decisions you make, that somebody might not get that this is comedy, and all of a sudden, something's going on and this thing, I kind of lose control of it and people think it's real? Yeah,
I do. There's more unpublished drafts of kayfabe news stories than there are published stories. Because sometimes an idea will come to me, and there's a few rules I have for myself, which is mainly try to focus only on these characters that are on TV, not the human beings that play them. Wrestlers are people too, and they go through their own personal struggles. So if some wrestler has a drug problem or a court case or had multiple run-ins with the law, I try to stay away from that. If their character on TV has gone all through this, that's fair game. And I try to make sure that I steer clear as much as I can from real life scandals. Partly out of respect to the people, but partly out of a absolute desire to not get sued. And so usually if a story sort of takes off, it's because it's ridiculous, but it's, wrestling itself is ridiculous. So some of these stories are just crazy enough to be true. And that, when you hit that sweet spot, like, that's insane, but this is wrestling, so it could be true. That's sort of the magic spot.
I've seen where you have touched on some, and again, I think this is sort of comedy at its highest form, when you touch on something that is sort of sensitive, and but do it in a way that is smart and sort of like criticizing something in a way that's sort of like elevated. Including, I just saw I guess the week of the McMahon scandal breaking, and it was just that crazy week where we thought we'd need to record like a 4-hour podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I think the headline was like slow week in news or something like that, which is it's perfect. It's exactly.
Actually, I talked to Sarah about that, because I said, this whole Vince McMahon thing, I can't really touch it because people have been hurt badly. There's a court case afoot, and it's dirty laundry. It's not funny in any real way. So I said, I don't know if I can joke about this at all. But then the joke was, oh, everybody else is talking about this. So my joke is, oh, slow news week in wrestling.
Yeah.
Vince McMahon, he's in every headline around the world for all of these scandalous accusations. And my headline was, Vince McMahon, singer of 1987 hit Stand Back.
I saw that, that's great. Yeah, I grabbed a few things. Just what I could find, and that was one of them. A few others that I just got such a kick out of. And this is the kind of thing, exactly what I was talking about, where people will think it's real, and then it's sort of the best of both worlds, because it's both funny and it's going to like piss people off. Cody Rhodes against WrestleMania pre-show match against Baron Corbin. I just love that. and because did you check comments on that? I didn't. Were people freaking out?
I tend to not pay as much attention to comments now as I used to, which I think is probably a healthy life choice.
Yeah, same.
And sometimes I'll post something and then I just kind of forget and I go on with my own life. And then 3 or 4 days later, I look and see that, 800 people commented on this. And there's a big...
Yeah. And there's something to be said again about this day and age, because this is how like fake news gets around is, right? Somebody writes something up and then it's passed by, along until somebody, and nobody knows the source. It's like, it looks legitimate. Look, this is like a nice, sleek wrestling news site. It must be a real. What else was great? I love this one for, a lot of these. What's great is just like the timing, and it was a disgruntled CM Punk walks out of WWE, and I think did you post that the day that he showed up on Survivor Series? Which is so fantastic.
Yeah, sometimes the joke is timing. Like if I can turn something around during the commercial break after a thing happens, like people are like, holy crap, did you have that loaded up? But sometimes you can have a joke loaded and you're just waiting for the moment to unleash it.
So does it work sometimes that way, that that the light bulb goes off and you got to run over to the computer or put it down on your phone or something?
Yep, that's exactly how it works. And a lot of times there is no light bulb, and I sit down at the computer and I stare at a blank screen and I think, well, what's funny in wrestling? And that means I'll scan wrestling headlines, but then I'll go and scan real world news headlines and see what is often the joke isn't wrestling is the arena for a larger joke. I did a joke about how the only thing that can stop a heel with a steel chair is a babyface with a steel chair. It's that whole mentality around shootings, and it's the joke is the absurdity of the idea. The joke has nothing to do with wrestling. I'm just using wrestling as a way to elevate the joke.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sting in the news retired last night. I was looking for Sting headlines, and you had this is June of last year. Sting still desperately trying to get over with wrestling fans, which is just so great.
I think that was day after he came back, or he won something, and at age 60.
Yeah. So just great stuff. If you guys aren't following kayfabe news, I talk about on the podcast a lot. That's sort of like the ultimate test for me is, will my wife and kids enjoy something? Because none of them can give a damn about wrestling. And my wife subscribes to kayfabe news now. She on her own, she sends stuff to me, cracking up.
That's amazing.
So, how has it grown? I mean, talking about. I guess it's something of a leap of faith when you first begin this, like any kind of business. Was it just sort of like this little side hustle? Maybe a few hundred people will get a kick out of it, and what has it grown to now?
I didn't even know if it'd be a few hundred. It was an idea that I thought a couple of my friends would enjoy and that I would enjoy. It occurred to me after talking to some wrestling. Colt Cabana and Mick Foley both are involved in comedy and wrestling, and I talked to them and had this idea, and really didn't know if anybody would pay attention. And but I was kind of having fun coming up with the stories, having my own little onion. So I wrote maybe a dozen or so before publishing anything, and so it would look sort of like a legitimate news site from day one. And like, I remember the first time a couple dozen people were on the site. I could see the analytics. I was like, holy crap, a couple dozen people are on the site. And then it grows over time, and you see it take off, and some of the stories go viral and end up at the top of Reddit and something, and you get these huge numbers. Kayfabe News, it just grew over time. And I told myself, as long as I keep enjoying writing them, and as long as people keep reading them, I'll keep doing them. And that was 11 years ago. I used to do it every single day, 7 days a week. I'd post a story. And that was just a personal challenge I put on myself. And the challenge is still there, but the
yes, that word. I'm not a journalist.
I know it's 3,000 some odd articles I think I've published.
Oh my gosh, really? Wow.
So
in what, 10 years, or how long has it been now?
10 or 11 years.
Okay.
And so I still try to do it several times a week. And but we're working on a documentary about wrestling, and now I'm actually involved in wrestling myself as a referee. So Kayfabe News kind of opened that door. Not just kind of, Kayfabe News really opened the door. Whenever I reach out to somebody now and say I'm making a documentary, By the way, I'm the guy from Kayfabe News. Generally, people say, "Oh, Kayfabe News, yeah. Let's chat." I like that. So it's been a real entree to having the connections to even begin making a movie.
Yeah, so let's talk about the movie. Was your decision to make the documentary and just explore the life of a referee? Did that come out of sort of the humor side? In this ridiculous world, the kind of particularly ridiculous role of the referee.
That's part of it. The referee is such a crucial figure in that. They're part of every single match. But yeah, they in many ways they're the dumbest person in an arena full of 15,000 people, right? The referee is kind of a running joke in wrestling, but also essential to the illusion that wrestling is. And nobody's ever really paid attention to the ref. I've never seen a documentary about the ref. And generally, we see hundreds of documentaries about every scandal and every triumph in wrestling. But the ref is a bit character at best in those stories. So I thought, for once, let's take the supporting character and make them the main character. And that just jives with my background in journalism. When I was writing for a newspaper, my beat was basically to find offbeat, untold stories. I sort of found the features that were in between other beats. So I was always looking for underdog stories and human interest stories about the person behind the scenes who you don't know makes it all work. And that was really the impetus. And it was one idea, like, why hasn't anybody ever told the story of the referee? And I pitched this idea to Sarah and our late friend Marshall, thinking every time I pitched the idea to them or anybody, I thought they'll say, "Oh, that's dumb. Who cares about the referee?" But other, wrestlers were saying, "That's a good idea. That's a cool idea." So Sarah and our friend Marshall, when I was just floating this idea, they said, "No, Colin, we're making this movie." And she and Marshall sent me a little video where she played Miss Elizabeth and Marshall played Randy Savage. And yeah,
Marshall had to tell me what to say.
Yeah.
I didn't know who Miss Elizabeth was.
Yeah. But you knew you wanted to make the movie.
Yeah.
So yeah, Macho, we're gonna make a movie. So that was more than a year ago, and for the past year we've been traveling around to indie wrestling shows. The original idea was to follow me as I become a referee, and that is part of the movie. But what we've discovered is that it's only a part of a bigger movie that's full of interesting people and beautiful stories. And so we're focusing on some referees that are veterans and been doing it forever, and then some newcomers like me, and a second generation ref who's following in her father's footsteps. So we found this like beautiful human interest story wrapped into what was essentially kind of a kooky idea, like, what if I become a ref and we film it? That's still there, but it's so much richer than that.
Yeah, well, we thought it was going to be a little bit more comedy and a little bit more silly, watching, the tallest, plus, I don't know, are there taller refs than you?
I'm 6'3". I'm far too big to be a...
That's a no-no, right? That's
very imposing in the ring. And Ken Kensington, who's one of your mentors, I would say, is a bit of a tinier human who in it. We've got some great shots of the two of them working together. But what we thought was going to be filled with more comedy has turned into a beautiful story about the community that indie wrestling brings together every weekend. And it was. It's been a joy to film for over a year. I didn't know a lot about wrestling. I have a wrestling podcast with our late friend Marshall Ward that Colin mentioned. And
Unscripted Spectacle, a very good podcast
Thank you.
in which the premise is a person who knows everything about wrestling,
and
someone who knows almost nothing about wrestling, but learning.
Although when I met up with Keith Elliott Greenberg in New York last fall, he was saying, you can't claim that you know nothing about wrestling anymore. You have to shift. You have to change that.
Yeah.
It's true.
You've been to what? 15 indie wrestling shows in the past year. That's more than any sane person would ever.
Yeah. But I haven't been to like a pro wrestling show.
Well, they're all pro wrestling.
You know what I mean? Yeah, they're all pro wrestling. Correct. I'm sorry, what was that?
Like a WWE show? You haven't been?
I tried to go to a house show, but I didn't end up staying for the show. Just circumstances.
You got to do WrestleMania. I mean, just in terms of like those contrasts, right? The highest and the lowest. I mean, it'd be fascinating to get your take on.
It's funny. Show. We went to Los Angeles to film and WrestleMania was there, but we didn't get to see WrestleMania.
No, we were filming people.
Filming people at the wrestling convention.
Yeah.
Bill Alfonso and and others for this documentary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so what's the pitch to become a referee at these shows? I mean, do you have to tell them, look, I'm making this movie, would you let me be your referee?
Yeah, it's exactly it. There's an indie here. So I live in Ontario in Canada, and there's a indie 365 Pro Wrestling. You know, much like any mid-sized city or town will have its resident indie, and I've been going to them as a fan, just watching for years. And I said, I'm making this movie. Can I interview some people? And so at first we just went and interviewed some people. And then I went to training at a local wrestling school. And I
Off the Rope Studio in Kitchener.
Off the Rope Studio. It's
referee
great.
Training or wrestling training, or are they one and the same?
Both. It turns out they're largely one and the same, especially at first. You have to know how to bump, at least basically, to understand what the wrestlers are doing and how not to hurt yourself if you do have to go down, and roles and things. So, but then essentially in training, I would referee training matches. So you get students and they're putting on a training match. And of course, we're all terrible. I'm a new ref. I don't know where to be. And there's a lot more to it than one thinks. But then over time, they deemed I was ready. So I'd get one match on a local indie show. And then I'd get 2 matches on a local indie show until just recently. I don't want to give it away because it's kind of the finale of the movie, but I reffed a 4-on-4 match with some of my favorite, I'm not really a sucker for the John Cenas and the Rocks of this world. I love a good low card comedy guy. So anyway, a bunch of my indie heroes, I was invited to referee a match in front of a crowd of about 800. And so that's how it goes, you know. Started from in front of nobody in a school to working your way up. It's the same way the wrestlers would do. And I had to kind of earn my spot. 6 months ago, they wouldn't have let me ref on that show because I wasn't good enough yet. And maybe it'll be another 5 or 10 years before I'm even good enough to consider, you know, NXT. Not that that's a goal. I'm a 47-year-old man, but that's how it goes if this is done correctly. And what I've realized is that it's the repetitions. You have to go out and do it over and over again the way the indie wrestlers do. You don't. In very rare circumstances does a wrestler get to jump straight to the big leagues without going through the indie progress. Right. And that's it's not just sort of paying dues. It's how you learn how to do it, how you get comfortable in a ring and know where to be and know where the cameras are and learn about timing. There's so much more to a match than is presented to the fans, which is good. You don't want the fans to know how the sausage is made. You don't want to give away the magic trick. But once you're behind the scenes and part of the magic trick, there's an awful lot going on to pull off this illusion. It's wrestling's far more impressive than I ever thought. Now that I'm involved, I'm even more impressed with the people who do it.
Same.
It's quite an incredible, it's not a sport, but it's an incredible performance art with elements of sport that I didn't fully appreciate my whole life until I actually got in with them. I said to somebody the other day, it's both more fake and more real than I realized. And more fake in the level of competition and trust and friendship. Sorry, the level of cooperation and friendship and trust is huge. But the realness, until you're in a ring and you've taken some bumps, you don't know what it feels like. And I guarantee it hurts more than people think.
Right. And the referee's job is I think you mentioned that if you're doing a great job, you won't even be noticed. But also, you know, the only reference point you have for being a referee is the time you've noticed the referee, right? So I'd imagine it is easy, you know, and it's sort of ironic with you being kind of in the parody business, but like it'd be easy to fall into just becoming a parody of the referee. And we've seen these even on some big stages, the ones that are sort of like it's so put on that it almost feels like you're making fun of them, right?
Yeah.
So was it hard for you to hit that note? Was it maybe your goal at the beginning to kind of have some fun with it and do what I think a referee is supposed to look like, and somewhere along the way did you know, how does that evolve?
Yeah, I think maybe Sarah can speak. Like when I'm doing it, when you're in it, it's hard to sort of analyze how you're doing it. But I've realized that as a big guy, I need to use that to my advantage. So I need to really show authority and and not be a pushover. And I'm working on that. I can physically get between people and move them apart. And I think I should use that to my advantage. I can't pretend that I'm a small person. But what I've realized is that I think my character is a ref, maybe because I'm trying not to be the kayfabe news guy, but I'm deadly serious. And I was worried that I'd be having so much fun that I'd crack a smile here and I'd laugh here and there. My first day of training, they told me that if I laughed, they'd slap me across the face. Then they slapped me across the face, just tell me what it feels like.
You.
Yeah,
just a
little warning shot. Say, here's what'll happen.
Yeah.
But when I'm at it, I don't feel like I'm playing the role of a ref. I think
you are a referee now.
You're a ref, right?
You're a referee that gets invited to officiate matches.
Yeah. And when people cheat, I'm angry.
You are.
That's great.
Yeah.
And that was a real learning experience for me where I thought, well, you're part of this show. I don't know why you're so worked up or nervous before it. Just go out and do your performance. But no, you're actually officiating something and you have to keep everybody in line, even though it might be different from boxing or
and you have to be, there's
else.
Always in the back of your mind, is this guy selling or is he hurt? And so
as a camera person, I have often gone really wanted to check on these new friends that we've made. Sorry to speak over you, but realize, oh no, they're just
selling.
They're selling it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so that's you're in there and you want the match to go smoothly and you don't want to be the reason something gets screwed up. It's the act of being invisible 90% of the time and then being exactly where you have to be and perfectly placed for that 10% of the time, and
rolling with it if it doesn't work.
Yeah, and improvising on the spot. So there's a lot of improv that goes on, even when there's the best laid plans, and you have to be able to think on your feet. So I think my character as a referee is sort of the opposite of how I approach wrestling. But as a referee, I'm deadly serious, and sometimes the heels will try to play with me, or someone will try to get a laugh out of me, and there's a part of me that's having the absolute best time of my life. Oh my God, I'm in a wrestling ring. I'm doing this. I'm in a match. I can't believe it. And then the other part, the front facing part of me has to have this really stern look and be watching the holds really carefully.
And you might see that in the film. You might catch these glimpses that we filmed of Colin really trying to pull back and bring himself back into the referee. And it's not put on. He's so excited, like a child. I think, sorry to call you a child in the ring. You're so excited to be living out this dream. That's what we're picking up when we're filming. But then you really have to bring yourself back into that character and make sure that you're officiating. And also, we've made such strong relationships with the rest of the referees that are in our film. Harry, Ken, Cameron, Emily, Stephen, many others.
Lots.
Earl Hebner. Yeah. So you've made such strong connections with these other referees that when Colin gets out of the ring, he's going to hear it if he messes up.
All right, that was Sarah and Colin. Be sure to go check out their movie. I think you could just Google The Ref Didn't See It and figure out how you could support the movie. And again, I guess they said that they're hoping it'll come out sometime this summer. Get the rest of the interview on our YouTube page. Guys, before we head out here, anything you guys want to promote? Jason, you mentioned, I think before we got on, you've got a brand new column in PWI, right? Just debuted.
I do, yes. I just wrapped up my second column, so it'll be in the next issue of the magazine. But my column is The Irish Whip, and takes a look at the British, Irish, and European wrestling scenes, and kind of provides a wee bit more info on people who may not know about the scene over here.
Yes, great addition to the magazine. And Brian, on top of, you still got 2 columns in the magazine?
Yes, I know you like to always bring that up. I only have one. The way it was. Yes, the lockup in the current issue is talking about Sting and his career, and the way it was is actually about Brian Pillman connecting to Lexis King in NXT.
Yes, and how is the book coming along? The Gorilla Monsoon, Irresistible Force, is that it, right?
Irresistible Force. Yes. Even though Nia Jax is trying to steal that, I'm gonna have to get my lawyers. But it's daunting. I mean, I'm in the middle of the real depths of the writing, and it's driving me a little nuts. I feel like I need to isolate myself off in a cabin somewhere to get this thing done. I just had to ask for an extension from ECW Press, which they're granting me, thankfully, because I want to do it right. I mean, I think it's going to be a very thorough, detailed book. But I also, and that, of course, for people that don't know, it's the biography of Gorilla Monsoon that I'm working on, Irresistible Force. And I also want to mention about my podcast, Shut Up and Wrestle, because I have something special planned for WrestleMania week that I've already done. It's in the can, but it's a round table of former WWE employees like myself. And just in light of everything that has been coming to light, this sort of thing, talking about the culture, the corporate culture, life on the road in a very candid way. It's not a hit piece or anything, just in a very real, nuanced way of what it was like being on the inside of that and the things that we, what it may have had a sense of or not and what that was like. So that should be a very interesting discussion, and it'll be in the week leading up to Mania.
I saw when you were reaching out for folks that, and as soon as I saw it, I thought, oh, what a great idea. And I meant to know that it was probably jealous that they didn't think of it first, but really a fantastic idea. But I think you and the kind of people you can have on, it's so interesting because you're not, the guys who are out front, you weren't the superstars or anything. So I think it's potentially a look at a side of WWE that most folks don't know about him. WWE essentially as a place where you punch a clock every day, right? And
like we were existing in the shadow of all these huge things and these huge personalities, but we were there and we saw and heard a lot of things. And it's probably not going to even be the only one I do, because I did get a good response to that. I put out a social media call. Anybody that used to work at WWE, anyone I may know that's comfortable talking honestly, and it doesn't even have to all be negative. It's not all negative, but who wants to just talk honestly about what it was like there, and so I probably have enough people that I could do a couple of those. But the first one is going to be WrestleMania week. I've got Jimmy Noonan, who was the head of security for years there. He's the guy that looked like Stone Cold Steve Austin. If you watched the show back in the day, he was the security guy. I've got Deb Jasway, who I've had on the show before. She worked in creative services. She had great stories from that. And I also have Lou DiPietro, who he's contributed to PWI. Louis D. He was a web guy on the road and in the office, so he kind of has that unique perspective of crossing both worlds. And I thought it was a great group. We didn't even all know each other that well. I mean, some of us did, some didn't. And it just really came together. It was actually kind of emotional at times. I think people will enjoy it.
Did your times all overlap?
To some degree or another, yeah. Like Jimmy was there in the late 90s into the 2000s. Deb was there from like 1990. I mean, she's got crazy stories of she knew Freddie Blassie and Andre the Giant. And I mean, but she overlapped with my time as well. And Lou was there. It's interesting. Lou was there for part of my time, and then he came back when the network was getting.
Yeah, he was there relatively recently.
They brought him in for a couple of years as freelance in helping to kind of like curate the network footage. So it's a little bit before, a little bit after, a little bit during. Yeah,
I definitely wanted to check that out. Yeah, when I saw that, I got excited about it. So yeah, we'll definitely stay tuned for that. And WrestleMania being in Philadelphia, hopefully at least some of us will get a chance to see each other. I know Kevin's been hopefully planning something, and maybe I'll plug an event that he's helping promote, Thrashelvania, I think is what he's calling it, right? An indie show. There's, I'll give you no shortage of them. This one is really special. A tribute to his late wife, and also raising money for an important cause. So I'm sure you can find more on his Twitter, X, whatever it is, which is Wackelvania. So check that out. I'm sure we'll have more before WrestleMania. Guys, thank you so much. We'll do it again soon. See everybody soon.